Behold, a NEMA 23 step-in motor. Now, years ago, these things became really worth money on eBay. I originally started out at $7 and something as surplus from copier machines. And then the CNC craze came along. Now, in the 3D printers, they use basically a smaller NEMA 17. Some use this. The Chinese, when they sell you their little miniature CNC machine, they give you a smaller step-in motor. But this step-in motor is out of a large copier machine, the kind that would be in a store, a really large one. And they were dumped on the surplus market, thousands of them, and maybe even millions. And they were $7, and they immediately shot up to like $25 because people started wanting them. And they wanted them to spin them. Motor spinners. I gave them a name, motor spinners. Okay? Now let's go back in history to the first motor spinner. I grew up on a dead-end street, and we had this kid, and his parents would buy him a U-control airplane, the one that runs with the has two wires, and it's got a thing you hold in your hand, and it goes around in a circle, and you can make it go up and down, controlling the elevator with the two wires that go out to the plane. And he would get dizzy. So every time they gave him a plane, he'd take the motor off it, he'd go in the garage, and he'd tighten it into a vise. And he'd play with the motor right there. The nice, really nice airplane without a motor. He'd give me the airplane. And I didn't have a motor, didn't have the money to get a motor, so I'd like toy around with it, and then it would go out in the garbage. And he was the first motor spinner I ever dealt with. He would also, he did go on to build a car from scratch, a dune buggy. But he was the first motor spinner I knew. He went one time, took a walk down to Two Guys, and he bought the largest RC motor you could buy. And the thing, I won't say it's an 078, I don't remember the number, but most were 030 somethings, the small ones. But he bought this big one with the big prop on it, and he bolted it into the vise in the garage. And he started it up, and he played with it for days. He was grounded for a month for bad grades. So he would come over and ring my doorbell and suck me into some of his projects. But anyway, he'd run this motor, and then one day his battery went down low, so he put a train transformer across the glow plug. And I told him, I went through this many times with him. He burnt out my motor for my erector set because he didn't understand there's DC and there's AC. Well, he tries the same trick using the train transformer on the glow plug. I said, you really got to start out low on the bottom end. And he just pushed that lever up and burnt the glow plug out. So then we spent days going to Two Guys, and he kept asking the guy, did you get the replacement glow plugs in yet? Did you get the... He would go back, he'd go there at the drop of a dime, and we'd walk 3 miles each way to try to get the glow plug that he burnt out. And that thing, years later, I went to visit the father, and there was it still sitting in the vise. He was the very first motor spinner. Now, when we get into CNC machines, I told you in the past videos I've deleted, I got into CNC to make a simple-to-make machine that would actually produce products, and I sold the plans. And I gave support. I helped people out that were willing to try to build the thing or had skill to build the thing. It didn't go the way I wanted it to. I put 20 years of my life into it, a lot of my savings. But in this one group, there were motor spinners. Now, it's all one word, motor spinners with capitals. That's how I spelt it. And what these people do is they can't afford a CNC machine, but they would buy the step-in motors and some type of controller. Now a guy goes, oh, it's not a controller, it's a driver board. You know, the computer is actually a controller for the driver board. So you can nitpick either way, depending on how the driver board is. Now my driver board actually changed direction of the motor, so it's sort of a controller. But anyway, these guys would buy step-in motors. They would upgrade the step-in motor. They would buy bigger power supplies so they could make them spin faster. And I want to show you what their CNC machine entailed. Okay, let's see if I got one here. Oh yeah, here's the most common CNC machine of those guys, of those old men. There it is. a piece of tape, and they would spin that tape, and I think I see it losing steps. Ramp up and ramp down, accelerate, decelerate, accelerate, deaccelerate. I don't know if I got it, my parameters correct. And then the people would have to explain them, the reason it's losing steps is it needs a load. You know, tape, the air hitting this tape isn't enough load to keep the stepper motor from overstepping one step. You could slow it down, but they didn't want that. So they would run the stepper motors faster and faster with the tape on it. No machine would come out to bear. I'd go in the group, they'd attack me. I'd attack back, I got kicked out. Okay, now, some of them would actually go from $50 each stepper motors, and the driver, I won't mention the name of the driver, but I think I need to switch to servos. So some of them would actually go and buy servos. I'm getting errors they have on the servos. They sometimes have an encoder on the servo, and it would get out of sync. Again, it's the same problem. It really needs a load on it. And this would go on for weeks, and you had these blind leading the blind. Meanwhile, there was a guy in there, he had a Shoreline, and he put some stepper motors on and a controller, and he was making rings and selling them. And all the rest were trying to do something like that, but without a machine. And week after week, well, I hear this. Oh, you can put a dampener on the end of the shaft, and it's all unbelievable. And I got in fights with them because I didn't realize how stupid they were, and the fact that they're never going to have a machine, it's never going to exist. And there's guys that were grabbing Bridgeport manual machines, thinking they were going to put a stepper motors on it. Now, Bridgeport is going to need a lot of torque to turn those handles once you take the handles off, and then you're going to need large servo motors. So then you start off with, my power supply is not big enough for my motors, you know. And then they got to buy a really expensive power supply, and then it was craziness, okay? And it just went back and forth and back. I'm getting special lead screws on the Bridgeport, retrofitting the Bridgeport, because if you know a manual Bridgeport, there's ways of when you're cutting on it to compensate for the backlash. You know, I'm using double ball screws, and there was no machine involved. There were people that were buying Bridgeports, taking pictures of them up on a trailer. Then when they get it to the house, they realize it won't fit in the cellar. They wrap it up with a bunch of plastic. Oh, what's the name of that grease that the Chinese use when they ship machines to the United States? I gotta cover up Bridget. One guy called the machine Bridget. It's Bridgeport. I gotta cover up Bridget. Bridget won't fit in the house, and I don't want Bridget to rust. So the guy takes this grease and he puts it all over the machine, and he puts plastic drop cloths over it. Now I'm going to tell you what's going to happen with that unit. Mice are going to get up in there. But besides the mice, the drop cloths, being out in the weather, they get brittle and they break. And that's where that Bridgeport never saw a motor, okay? And most of the motors and the controllers and the control software, and never saw a machine. Meanwhile, I'm pumping out one design after another. I'm trying to make the machine simpler and simpler, and to use, like I said, hardware store parts. And originally, the first machines weren't hardware store parts. They were the aluminum channel storefronts that are on the mall. You go to a glass company, not to sew glasses, companies that do windows for shopping malls. And you go there and you show them a picture in the booklet from the plans, and they cut you off some pieces, and that's what you build around your machine on, and some PVC. But it was amazing. I got the name Hardware Store CNC, and I started using that because my new machines started using gas pipe and flanges until they got so bad from China. And then rollerblade bearings. I had guys, I actually remember the guy's name. Oh, those rollerblade bearings, they're garbage. They're absolute garbage. I put them in my roller skate, and I went down a hill, and by the bottom of the hill, they were no good. That's not the truth. You're lying somewhere. They sold tubes of hop-up bearings for roller blades, and they were really good bearings. Okay? And I started using, other people started copying. One guy basically copied one of my machines. He just rotated something 45 degrees or whatever. Started giving the plans away. It was a nightmare for me, an absolute nightmare. But motor spinners, I used to make fun of them. They used to get really mad. No machine ever existed, okay? The other thing too is, you take the power supply out of a microwave oven and you rewind the coil and you can make a really good power supply. Okay, so now you got guys collecting microwave ovens, okay? And then they start collecting bed springs, bed frames. And they're going to weld these bed frames. Well, they get into collecting the bed frames, and then they got so many bed frames, they don't know what to do with the bed frames. And every time they see one out for garbage, they grab it because they've started going down that path where you start hoarding something. I used to read it, and I was amazed. I was totally amazed at the way people went. Where me, I kept saying, I want to make a machine that's easier to build, you know. And then that Maker Slide, is it Maker Slide came along? I knew right away that was going to be the beginning of the end. But when they made the Maker Slide, that aluminum extrusion, they made it too small. They didn't design it right. And I was thinking about jumping in with my idea for it to fix it. Now I said, you know what, stay out. So they've redone it. The machines that use that stuff, they've redesigned them like 6 times already to try to get it to the point where it should have been what you were paying $1,000 for. It's the whole thing went bad, and all of a sudden, 3D printer came along. And see, people just want to print something, you know. And with the CNC, they would ask for someone else's codes, not realizing their machine could be slightly different. They didn't understand that, and you'd understand how much they didn't understand by some of the stupid questions answered. But when 3D printing came along, there was this large sucking sound. Okay, and it just sucked the life out of CNC. Okay, because people really aren't into using the CNC machine for what it was meant for. Now, there were a few guys that built CNC machines to make guitar bodies, and 1 or 2 actually made the fretboard with a CNC machine. And probably now, I did notice there's people making violins with them. Okay, that's where I was going. Okay, but the problem is you got companies that have thousands of dollars for research and development, and me, I had some retirement money, and I went for it. I went for it. You know, I look back on my life. I don't say, well, I should have, I could have, if I would have, and all those phrases. I went for it. It didn't work out. It worked out to a certain point, but the people I attracted at a low price point are people that never finish anything. You know, a few did. You know, in the beginning, the very first guys that got interested in CNC, they finished their machines. And then the Johnny-come-latelys, it's like their computers. When computers first come out, the real brainiacs wanted one. They got one. And then the other people that want one so they can tell everybody they have one, got a computer. And then the peak hit. I was in the electronic barn, and Herman says, they're not selling as many computers as they used to. It's over with. The peak is gone. And you'd say, that's crazy. No, he was absolutely right. People that shouldn't buy a computer bought one. So it caused a peak. And then the people like myself that use a computer every day, they still buy and update. Where those other people, yeah, I got to get some software for it. Yeah, the thing's 10 years old. I got to look for some software for it. And then when you break it to them that any software they find isn't going to run on the machine, they look at you with this, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about. And I tell people, a computer ages 7 years for every year in reality. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, that's 10 years old. It's a 70-year-old computer. Well, it's like a dog. It ages really fast. It doesn't age like a human being. A 10-year-old computer is beyond old. It should have been in the landfill by now. Well, I never got around. That's right. You never got around to turning it on and to learning how it worked. It's like all the other stuff you got in your garage that you're never going to follow up on. And the things you bought are now obsolete. You know, if you buy a bow for shooting 20 years ago, the bows they have now, totally different. Fishing equipment changes. You could still go fishing with it, but it's modernized. And if you held on to the line, the plastic line, it's going to get brittle over the years, just sitting there in your tackle box. All right, I've looked through all this, and like I said, the guy I grew up with the airplane, putting the motor in the vise out in the garage, and just wheeling it, making it run as fast as he could make it run. The real big motor, he could actually get the blade, the propeller. It was a nylon blade. He was actually trying to get that to snap, but in reality, the plane would be flying at that speed. He's running the motor where it can't move in a plane. It's sitting in a vise. And he's saying, look how that's bending. Why is that bending? I'm like, man, you don't see the dynamics of anything. And yeah, everybody said he was really smart. He wasn't smart. He was probably one of the stupidest people I ever knew. And he would always change things his way, and then they didn't work. And then you would fix it for him, and he'd be upset. Okay, he would throw a baby fit. What was it, 50 years old? Throwing baby tantrums? Yeah. I think that's it. Motor spinners, hardware store CNC, it's all in my past. All right, that's it.